Welcome to Fontribute, where we talk about fonts and their attributes. Fontribute. It's me, Thomas, again. I'm with Erin, as always, and we
Hi.
have our next guest for this week, Johannes. Thank you for joining us this week on Fontribute.
Yeah, hello. Thanks for having me, guys.
Awesome, Erin. So what are we doing today?
Well, Johannes found our post on type drawers and he said, I'm working on something in progress. And he couldn't quite tell yet whether he wanted this to be a text typeface or a display typeface. That's kind of how he described it to me. He designed Quell up here at the top, and this is in progress. It's, as everyone can see here, it's a very like geometric kind of sans serif design, but there's also some contrast introduced. And so I thought, let's compare it with this typeface called Tenor Sans, which I found on Google Type, designed by Denis Masharov. And this one definitely has a lot of contrast going on, but it's a sans serif. So I thought we could maybe talk about some of these issues of weight and form and have a good time. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the typeface, Johannes? Sorry.
Yeah, sure. This is it's currently the third retail typeface that I'm working on. And it started like most type ideas, basically just scribbling around. And for me, sort of the merit when I continue with something is when several days or every once in a while again, I draw the same shapes and I just keep getting stuck on them. So I basically decided, okay, there's something I want to explore. And with this typeface now, I've designed regular weights, and I've tried light and bold, and I imagine that it will get an oblique italic at some point. And the regular, as you mentioned, I'm not quite sure, or I think in a way, it has the ambiguity still. Like, could it be a text typeface, or should I increase more towards the display direction? So now it's open still, and yeah, I'm tweaking it still. The spacing and the kerning aren't done yet, but so far I like working on it.
Awesome, very cool. All right, so shall we get started, guys, on the first slide?
Let's take a closer look.
End time. Yeah. So, Erin, actually, I really appreciate this demonstration of the two slides next to each other, because the very first thing that caught my attention is how this joint was approached differently between the two. In Tenor Sans, there's this actually interesting tension, this little thinning occurring right here that it's almost like I feel like there's almost like the weight kind of is losing some weight, and then kind of more radically quickly loses it at the joint, going back into the stem. Just compare that to how Quell approached it. This is a much smoother transition. It's not this kind of rapid thinning effect happening I'm seeing here in Tenor Sans. This much smoothed out approach over in Quell. So that was probably the first thing I saw comparing these two slides. Erin, what are you seeing in it?
Definitely the thing that caught my eye viewing his typeface was everything's very wide. All of the characters that have round parts are extremely wide. So as everyone can see here, this N is, about 1.5 times the width of Tenor Sans. So we're going to see that that throughout. And also, this will be more evident in the round characters. But like you said, with this join here, the way that the contrast is kind of applied more vertically. Well, no, I mean, in both of them, there's a little bit of that. But I would say it's kind of it starts to fatten out just a tiny bit more once it enters the stem. We'll see that better in those really round shapes. But other than that, I mean, I've sized these up so they have similar X heights, so we'll be able to compare side by side kind of how they've used those proportions differently. So the other kind of obvious thing at this state is that Tenor Sans does have a lot more weight contrast. The stems are going to be a lot thicker. So we'll kind of see, I mean, this is going to be interesting as you decide whether this is display or text. One way or the other, you might need to make decisions about things being either more exaggerated in terms of contrast or less, or I'm not quite sure, because right now it's kind of like teetering on that edge where you don't quite notice that effect all too much compared to tenor. Anyway, it'll be interesting. Is there anything else you want to talk about first basic letter here. It's kind of
yeah, of course the N is for a reason. It's interesting to look at, and I think for me, what I noticed now that I'm also starting on the weights, it's this sort of ambiguity about how much contrast there is becomes really, then when you go to the extremes, you have to be more decided what you do. And yeah, I think there, for instance, the end is very difficult because all of a sudden these spots that you have here, like they just grow more and more tight. Here, switch to the drawing. So like all of a sudden this starts closing up more and more. So one of the things I try to do here already, that's barely visible, is like just thinning out this stem a bit compared to the where it's in the
you're
stem.
right. Yeah, you're right. Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah.
But it's yeah, I think it's tricky with this one because as you said, it's very wide, and looking at the end now in isolation doesn't tell you so much, of course, but you see with tenor sounds how you have a lot less of this wide feeling and stronger horizontal verticals. So for me, like playing with the curves and in all the round characters, sort of equally trying to look at the outside shape and the interior shapes is what really is interesting in this typeface, and what has taken me a lot of time so far, just tweaking that both of them, the interior and the exterior, look round, but at the same time you have the contrast and the slightly tilted axis that is going to be more obvious than in the round characters.
Great. Let's take a look then. Let's check it out, because you are right. Side by side, I mean, like he was saying, this is the Quell axis is slightly tilted compared to tenor. So, man, my initial reaction was totally wrong. But once you get up close, you really see that tilt. So that's really interesting to see. Thomas, what do you see?
Yeah, definitely that tilts the discussion, as well as how the curve profiles are handled differently. Again, there's a little more boxiness in the inner counter of tenor sans versus one round approach and Quell's counter. And then contrast with, yeah, kind of the contrast of how the outside curves were handled between the two. So the effects are different because of that. I can see that pretty clearly. Also, there seems to be like, yeah, this increase in jump in contrast. There seems to be a more abrupt move from the thickest part, moving back into the thin, while Quell is trying to be much more gradual in its movement from its thickest part to its thin part. So it's fascinating. And its overall width is actually pretty apparent. We can see that so far. Those are things that's what I'm seeing at this point.
Yeah, perfect. I think that's a good summation. Anything else, Johannes?
Johannes, anything else?
Yeah, I think, I mean, that points it out. I think for me, the interesting part about this is exactly not having a symmetrical inner shapes, but in a way, it's a geometric on the outside, but inside it has the stroke contrast that sort of has picked up some of these more classical directions, I'd say. So yeah, I think that is what interests me about it, or what intrigued me when I first started sketching it.
Very cool.
That's a good concept. I like that. So the D is, I think, a great example showing. I think the N wasn't as clear, but this is more clear in what I was attempting to say about how watching how that stroke gets thicker toward the stem, keeping that same kind of diagonal axis that we saw in the O. So that's something that's, I mean, kind of typical. You don't see this all that often because most typefaces like this try to, have thinning out and gradually kind of enter the stem and optically becomes, thinner and a little bit of, more high contrast there. But here it's going to be a little bit of darker join, which, depending on what you're going for. I mean, I think definitely in a display arena, that's an interesting concept, and you would want people to see that. It's not as typical that you see in a text face, this sort of thing, at least in the Latin script. So that's really interesting to me. And also just noting that the width was, you kept that bowl quite wide as compared to like the tenor sans design where it's a much more narrow.
Yeah, it's almost like this. It's like a flatness in the tenor sans approach, right? In this D, compared again, like the kind of in Quell, almost feel like you really try to honor that energy in the O, right? In this D of Quell as well. So that's definitely something I'm catching my attention. Yeah, actually in Tenor Sans especially, it's like this interesting, like kind of really strong, rapid move into the stem. I think it's a dramatically different approach than how Quell is handling it, as Erin pointed out, between the two.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I think also for me, like as I mentioned, one of the interesting things was to have these round shapes, and with these kind of letters, like then it becomes difficult if you're sort of set on having the outer shape round, so you don't want to like cave in like this. So if you keep it round, and you would like to go for a weight reduction like this, then all of a sudden, like the inner shape becomes all sort of wobbly, and again you break this illusion of this roundness. So I think it's a really tricky one, and for me now I decided that like this is how I approach it, and especially then going into the heavier weights, it's going to be more like this, that actually the round part eats away from the stem to balance this out a bit. As Erin said, these are going to be heavier then. So yeah, but so far so good.
Yeah, is that happening right now? Or are you doing that? Like if I compare, hey, right again.
Yeah, the regular has it
Yeah.
as well a bit, slightly, like a couple of units only.
Cool, very cool. All right, so shall we move forward? Actually, about one last note I do want to point out. I'm curious how this is going to work in text. How the X height, like the ascender decision to the width decision, right? Notice this versus this. I'm gonna be curious in paragraph settings how this works out. Just an observation. It just seems a very short ascender to a very wide letter form itself. So I'm just taking note from my own observation about that going forward.
Yeah, also when it scales down to like a text size, I think it's going to be interesting to see whether or not the slight bit of contrast that you've introduced seems intentional or not, or if it might look just like, and it might look like an accident since it's so subtle, So it's like that's something I'm concerned with, that we might have to, once we take a look at the text setting, to see whether it's does look deliberate, because obviously Tenor's is like way more drastic. So we'll see side by side.
We'll see.
All right.
This is fun. This is an interesting decision.
Indeed.
You don't see this too often, of an extremely wide without his little stabilizer.
In the bottom. Yeah. So my first reaction looking at this was, so your N, I thought, was very successful in that nice curve motion going into a straight. That I don't know why, for some reason I don't feel like it's as successful in here. I'm not sure why that is. Something about the curve, like that was like my first reaction to it. I don't know. It's hard to describe. I think also just maybe how the speed of the weight as it moved from the stem into the round. It seems faster, if that makes any sense, compared to how they handled it. I might be completely wrong in that instinct. But those are kind of the first two immediate notes I caught looking at the U at this case.
Well, I wanted to say one thing I think is a little strange. I mean, I know we saw the round shapes had a slightly tilted axis, but here it isn't even like quite symmetrical up and down. Like the axis that you would have had, this would have been the thinnest area, yet this is, to me, is slightly thicker than like even that side or something. I mean, I think there's something a little strange about that. But I think even more than the contrast, I think it might just be that I'm never used to seeing a U quite that wide. I think maybe
of this form, yeah,
of this type. I think usually it's a little more narrow, but I mean, once we see it in context, I think we'll be able to determine whether it's successful or not compared to its little part.
Yeah, I think there's definitely like a sort of work in progress thing going on here. Like you pointed out, this is a bit too thick here, like in this spot. Also about the wideness, I think one thing that I struggled is, especially with this U, I wanted to go for this shape without the stem here. And if you think about the control points being here, the further you drop them down, all of a sudden you have sort of more this
kind of boxy effect.
The curve becomes more boxy. So in a way, it's really difficult to balance it out to be looking very round, but at the same time, keeping the control points low enough to not look like it's stretched out.
Yeah, kind of stabilized, so it feels like it's sitting on the baseline, right?
Yeah.
No, it's. I'm very empathetic. My observations really, or I see where you're going with it, and I'm just like, this is a tough problem. It's a hard challenge. You made yourself. I mean, you gave yourself a hard assignment to try to pull off.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the in context how it holds up next to its neighbors. It's kind of it's hard. That's cool, though. I'm glad you decided to try it. Anything else we want to observe about tenor while we're here?
I was just going to comment. Just the whole point is like the big challenge of use is the whole idea is like you want to maintain the curve, like a nice smooth curve, yet it has to feel like it's stabilizing, like it's sitting on the baseline in a way. So I know I personally always had that tension problem when I draw U's myself, especially capital U's, because that's where this form is way more expected, right?
What? With like giant slab serifs on the top?
I don't know. I'm just saying, just serifs.
Okay, well, anyway, yes. Okay.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay, no, it's fine. No, it's fine.
Anyways,
cool.
Yeah. So I think it's actually a good investigation. Just talking about that.
Yeah, I think what got me into trouble here with this shape a few times is that I've started it over and had it perfectly symmetrical, and then tried to bring it the contrast axis that is slightly rotated, and that often, I think that is probably what caused this thickness here in this corner. But at the same time, the entire internal shape gets a bit distorted again. So it's even harder to balance this on the outside completely round shape.
Johannes, question: did you think about maybe thinning? Are these the same width of measurement?
Yeah, they are.
Did you try a version where maybe one of them got thinner?
I might have tried, but if I did, I don't recall it being good.
Being working very well.
But it might be an option. I mean, like characters like the V and A, capital A, they have this like slight stroke contrast brought to the upward, downward movement. So it is worth an idea.
Yeah, I actually included one of the diagonal characters in our up close looks, so maybe that's something we can discuss there too, because I think that's another place where some stroke contrast might help the situation. So, but before we get to that, in the middle we've got another character, S, which is always very difficult. I think it's one of the hardest characters to draw. Should we take a look there? Let's see.
Yep, we're there now.
Oh, good. So, I mean, when I'm looking at these S's, actually the first thing to pop out to me is the strange, actually it's in tenor. Oh, there are my dogs. The tenor sans like discrepancy. There's a much thicker bottom terminal. Thank you, Scrappy. Terminal here as opposed to the top, and I'm not sure why that is. I thought that was really weird. Yours feel more balanced, although I would say, the top is ever so slightly smaller, but that's, I think, kind of a typical move because you do want a little more stabilizing weight toward the bottom. So that makes sense to me. But I think something that does not, first I should back up and just say the S is, one of the few characters in your design that is a little bit more narrow, but again, with the genre of kind of geometric typefaces, usually S is one of those narrower characters. But I think the flaring out, there's something about it that doesn't quite, I think it's a little too prominent or something. It feels not geometric-y enough, in my opinion, but maybe Thomas has a different idea.
No, I'm in full agreement. This is it's a little left field. I think I know what it is. I think I get the idea of it. It's like you want some weight at the ends to kind of stabilize his form. Right, which as I assume was the original strategy of the tenor sans in the first place. This area right here, I get it. I think that your project, from my understanding, really tries to be incredibly subtle in how it gains its weight. and removes its weight. And I think the moments it's successful is when it does that, and the moments it's struggling is when it's a little bit in a problem situation where it has to be really rapid of gaining weight. So I think these S terminals, or this flaring effect, is probably that reference point. It's kind of an example of that.
Okay, well, interesting points. I mean, for me, these, let's put it like this: I liked the flaring in all the round characters like C and E, and capitals as well. And for me, it was almost like at some point I tried it on stems as well, and then I was like, okay, now we're going too far away from the original idea. But in the round characters, I liked it because it's sort of it seems like a decision, whereas just trying to be subtle and sort of leaving them in a way untreated. Just let's say I could just cap off this stroke like this, or maybe even do terminals that end like this vertically. Neither seemed to me to really fit in with this idea of the round characters having a axis that is clearly tilted and not symmetrical. So I didn't want to have in a way, what would have felt like a symmetrical or not generic, but like a even solution to the ends of the terminals. But yeah, it's a good comment.
I kind of think it could work if you push the contrast in the other letters to more extreme levels. I think right now they're a little more lukewarm. Like that, I guess I'm like hinting toward my conclusion at the end. I really do think that it needs to be pushed like further one way or the other, and I think all of them would benefit from this level of distinction of contrast. I think like the concept makes more sense and will look more deliberate if you do like embrace that level of contrast in the other letters. That's my idea right now.
It's funny, and I would counter with the opposite direction.
Yeah,
because I would say I think the issues need to introduce that axis energy then, meaning basically instead of the weight gain starting here and coming up, I was expected maybe like the thinnest point to be over here, right, and then it's more slowly getting the weight, getting to the end, something like that. So speaking to your other design decisions for the rounds specifically, so just a slower amount of time gaining weight, that might be the way to solve that problem, by having a more emphasized like axis of the contrast. So basically, you're getting two totally different pieces of advice at this moment. We'll see how the paragraph settings go.
I like where this is going.
Fine. That's cute. That's good.
Okay, shall we move forward, guys?
Sure.
All right, cool.
Cool. Now,
okay.
This is interesting to me because like this form of W, I think it's perfectly beautiful, and I like how it looks, but to me it doesn't quite fit what was happening, especially not with that S. That S was already like a little less geometric feeling and had a lot more contrast, but this W I don't feel has that same amount or that same concept of contrast. Yours does anyway. That was my initial gut reaction. What do you think, Thomas?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's geometric sans. Like it's it's very much so. So just like how the decision of the weight, right, the thin strokes were handled. Well, your design's doing more of this. Yeah, some definitely there needs to be a way to marry your system from the other letters back into the diagonals. I'm not against it. It just seems so different from what the S. Yeah. So if anything, I would expect your S either, as you said, go into that Futura mode of like vertical cutting or something, or really extreme other direction, like a super enclosing shape. Yeah, there's something about this form being introduced that's I guess if you really want to go for that geometry, I guess that's if that's the through line where you're trying to go for this. That's my initial reaction too, something along those lines.
Yeah, I think with the diagonals, I think the geometry is overemphasized compared to other characters because they probably, like you're right, that the contrast of the other characters is not entirely at the same level. So, which then leaves you to wonder, like, okay, where is it going? But for me, I mean, with the W, in particular, I think it's always how do you balance the overall grayness? And I felt, I had obviously this kind of was my first approach to have the downstrokes have the weight entirely, but they seem too uneven, or because they're so pointy. This seemed to always tilt the letter in one direction or another, so I went for a bit of midway solution with that one. But yeah, let's see where it goes.
Excellent.
Yeah, good philosophy. Let's see. And actually here in this next slide, we do at least get to see the V kind of compared to everything else. And to me, that's the one letter that stands out the most to me in this, is the fact that there's so much kind of weight right here, whereas everything else goes, much further down. So I think in this setting, at least, that's like the weakest link to me. I don't know. I mean, gosh, in this type of typeface, I mean, I don't think the diagonal letters ever look quite happy. Even in this one, I mean, I see how that you feel that it's much thinner on the right side, and it never quite seems right. But fortunately, I don't know. I don't know what the best.
Yeah, it's a hard problem. It's a hard one to solve.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Thomas, what are your initial thoughts?
Reactions? I mean, definitely one thing is the spacing is like there's a lot more inner counter space versus letter space between the letters, right? Take here versus here, for example. So it seems like on the initial question, is this display or text? This seems very display-y just on that nature alone of how the spacing decisions were made between the two. But we'll see when we see in paragraph settings to verify or not. I would agree, definitely. So there's color issues because of the decision of where is the contrast decided. If I do N, S, and V, even the S, especially kind of these questions about how the terminals are handled, and then the T as well. Actually, even that question like between the T and the S, it's kind of, you can sense it's still being figured out of what's going on. I do feel like for some reason I feel like it is successful in the R. I feel like this is a pretty good.
R looks good.
Yeah, a pretty nice. I think the question is really is the speed of transition of weights. That seems to be the real question at this point for these kind of terminal stroke decisions. And lastly, just I do want to point out, I don't know why for some reason this B feels like this really catches my attention, but yet it does not catch my attention here. I feel like I see your A, there is reduction of weight at that joint over there versus not in the B. So I'm sensing some of these color issues coming up a little bit.
Yeah, at this, I'm sorry, I don't want to jump in. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's totally, when you point out the two, this definitely feels darker still. I think what you said about the speed of transition from these things here, I do think you're probably right with speed as in the space it takes. So like here, or the R, where it has more more distance to cover where it tensions up. I think it looks more at ease in a way. So where here these letters, I'm a big fan of having a T and L with a tail. So here they look a bit cramped probably because the same kind of shape needs to happen in a smaller space, whereas in the white characters they have more room.
I will say I think yours is more successful of a T with the tail compared to
these are
Tenor Sans.
Little over the top, I think. I don't think those blend in very well. But I think, with watching kind of like what's happening in the contrast of the equivalent areas everywhere else, like I don't know if I kind of still think with what Thomas was saying, like this, I feel like this is a little too thick. Like it could just taper off and still, if you chop that there, that's kind of where the F would have been. So, I don't know. There's something about it that I don't think. I mean, this really does look like a different typeface, the amount that's flaring out right now, I think.
It's tough, man. This is not an easy assignment.
Tricky. This is hard genres to blend. Yeah, I don't know. Should we take a look at a few more bits and pieces of the system? Oh, wait, one more thing before I move.
Okay.
What do we just in this word? Do we want to comment on the U? It didn't bother me. I didn't notice it.
Did not bother you?
At this scale, I barely it didn't stand out to me, which I'm shocked. I don't know, maybe in words, text.
It's not as bad as in the micro view, but I sense the tensions in the bottom curve profile. Like I still sense it.
Sure, but though its width and like the fact that it doesn't have a stem, actually, like I didn't even notice that. So,
on that side of the
yay!
issue, no, I think it's fine. No, he's consistent with this width proportion, so consistent. I didn't mind on that level. No, that's fine.
Woohoo!
All right, good.
Passed the test. Okay.
On that level, yeah.
Okay. Oh, my favorite slide with all of the tiny little accessories here. Bits and pieces. So one thing that jumps out right away is you've chosen kind of untraditional, I would say, not in the genre of geometric typefaces, like quotation and like this acute mark. They're actually like very curvy, something I wasn't expecting. I'm not sure if I'm a huge fan because I don't really see these shapes echoed throughout the design very much. Like I think it doesn't look deliberate enough. Especially this acute, that's really jumping out to me how much it curves, but I don't know what Thomas thinks.
So I agree with the acute. The acute, it's fun, but yeah, I think a little extreme in the approach. Yeah, the quote marks. How best to put this? Yeah, I don't mind the curve because he's trying to be a little more nuanced in the decision. I think maybe it's there's something about it, maybe it's shaping or it's contrast, the amount how much it thins out to. There's something about it that seems a little. Wait a minute. Yes, maybe that.
Sorry, I tried it just smooth this out, but I think if you sheared it vertically instead of having that angle, I think that would help make it seem a little more similar to all your other decisions.
Yeah,
I think
I agree with that.
Yeah, I think that might be hurting, but definitely don't go this direction.
Yeah, don't do that.
That's way too crazy, like too computer, like yuck.
Way too hard.
That works.
I mean, that's just too sharp. Yeah.
Yeah, very harsh. They're also a little bit higher than is typical. Usually they line up a little bit closer to the cap height, I would say. But I mean, whatever. I don't know if people care about that. What else do we see? So other things.
There's the vertical metrics. I just want to be a nerd and go in that discussion.
Sure.
Just note about that. Yeah, just watch. Especially because this, you have it directly to the cap height, basically. So think when you get overshoots like this, let's watch for that. We don't want no bad clipping, things like that.
Let's see what else. I think there's also the question mark to me has a lot more contrast than we see in the type. Well, yeah, it has a little bit more contrast, I think.
Yeah, it's too much, and it's too abrupt. Like that's the thing. Like it seems the whole system is as old as quiet, smooth transitions. That seems to be the theme, at least to my understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the comma I think feels a little thick, as well as the exclamation. At least, I mean, I'm fine with this weight, but like I think the vertical seems a lot thicker than all the other ones you have going on. So that's another thing I'm noticing. What else?
Okay.
Yeah, I do think your question mark form is a more appropriate form than this.
Yeah.
Just letting that be known.
That's teeny tiny.
Yeah, and I think your positioning of your period to their parts is more resolved than in Tenor Sans. Oh,
also the elephant in the room. This is an opportunity to just also viewers at home to note there's, in my opinion, there's a very different approach to like the letter proportions. You have a lot more kind of narrowness happening in your uppercase than in your lowercase, or at least like it has a really interesting interplay of that, which is funny because I think tenor goes at the extreme opposite. They have very wide capital letters, so that's going to be interesting to see how those play around in text. And sorry, I think I was interrupting you, Johannes. I had a feeling you were trying to say something. I'll shut my mouth.
Sort of getting my thoughts here still. I don't know why the vertical metrics show like this. I have also like same kind of diacritics on the capitals, so they should eventually span up there. So this might be a mistake in the files that I sent you. I think what you said about the acute being too happy or too funny looking, I think in a way, for me, when I first drew it, I had like very plain diacritics at first, and I tried to echo the round shapes in them, and it was something that I liked, sort of the character it added, but maybe it is well, it has to still find the right balance of how much cute it adds that is not otherwise there. So they should, of course, resonate the other the rest of the typeface.
Yeah.
With the weight of these, I generally have a feeling I draw punctuation slightly on the light side, so I might have overcompensated.
I've done that too.
to eventually even it out still.
Well, then again, like that's also, punctuation is also directly related to the intended use of the
Application.
typeface. Yeah, because if this is a text,
Yeah.
if you want this to be text, then having them darker and larger is totally fine and probably preferable. But if you, as everyone can tell, if you made the quote marks a little more thin like that for display use, it would look real nice. So this is also interesting because I know the designer of this Tenor Sans also, this person stated, like many type designers do, my typeface is good for both text and display. It does everything. And you kind of have to like gauge, it's harder for people to tell, well, what really does it work well for? And it takes a little closer
investigating
to figure it out. Yeah, right. Oh, one more thing while I'm here. Numbers. I just wanted to note that I think there's something about the 2. The curve, I mean, this curve feels like really long and too gradual, I think, to me. Like, I think if there's some way you can draw this, like how sharp your M is,
Yeah,
like if it were more confident or something in that diagonal, I think it would just seem a little bit more at home. Kind of like what you did in the 3. This is very sharp and abrupt.
Yeah, it's louches.
Yeah. Yeah, good way of saying it, totally.
It's tight. All right, okay.
Yeah.
I think the numbers were difficult in a way that how geometric do I want to keep it? I mean, the 6 there, it still sticks out a bit to me, the 6 and 9, being this very round with a stick, when the other characters have a lot more liveliness in their strokes. So, yeah, I think the numbers like the 3, they do a nice combination of having both this rigidness, but also so softer shapes like we looked at in the S and question mark. But again, the balance is really when you go for something so angular, to marry it with then having the kind of things that are in the O. It's a bit of a rope walk.
Cool. Shall we move forward?
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
Here we are.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, obviously is everyone who's looked at type like this knows, as soon as you zoom out things, those small subtle details of contrast kind of are minimized. So the Quell, the contrast concept that you have, like I barely notice it at all. Tenor still holds on to that contrast concept. I'm not sure I'm a huge fan of it at this size though, but that's another idea. But yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to comment. My initial reaction is Tenor Sans' word space is too big for the letter spacing.
Yeah.
So I literally just see like a very bad quack might jinx. Like it's like these things are slammed or are too magnetized to each other as words, like individual within themselves, but the word space is too big. That was the first reaction I got.
Yeah, and I think the spacing of Tenor Sans is also kind of inconsistent. Like I think there's a lot of small areas where there's things that are looser, but some things are I don't know, maybe
real tight, like a BE, for example.
Like this is really there's some like little inconsistencies there. Yours I think is spaced fairly well, except like there's a couple of areas like this where that DIL is quite tight. I think you might want to increase some of the side bearings on, like, I guess mainly the I might be the one thing that's jumping out to me. And then, go ahead.
Yeah, I was curious because what I noticed with this, with proofs that I've printed of this typeface, I mean, as you said when we brought up the slide, right away when you see something in text, it changes appearance. But What I noticed is that like different line spacing is dramatically changes the effect of the text or how it appears. And I think that goes back to what we said in one of the first slides about the very, very small ascenders and descenders. That when you don't, in a way, it's ironic that having them being very condensed in their height, they need still a lot of space around them to not look like they're being squeezed, which is, yeah, something I'm not sure. Am I happy with it, that it has this effect of changing its appearance so strongly based on the line height?
Yeah, this was tricky for me too, because I had this like overwhelming urge to just see what the typeface would look like with a little bit looser spacing, because you know, it did maybe feel a little cramped to me. I had Thomas, or I don't know if you could quickly go to the next slide. We can go back to the original one, but I just included this where I like gave it a little bit more breathing room. Sure, it needs a little bit more leading as well at this size, but to me, like if you were just for the folks at home, if you were to turn this into a definitive, like this is supposed to be for text, I think your forms needed a lot more room between them, because I think there was so much tightness happening between all of your vertical, or you know, like straight characters against the rounds, and I think that this would be comfier if you're trying to have people read them at this size, and smaller, even more spacing, I would say. But anyway, that's just a quick demo for folks at home. If we want to go back to the original one, that's cool. Okay. But what else? I mean, what else do we want to? We can talk about any number of things. At this size, we can talk about. Let's see. We've got a few capital letters. I have more in our next setting too. But I think, yeah, I don't know. It's, to me, this is funny in tenor. Like the width decision is just like, I think, a little over the top. I don't think some of these letters are working so well.
Yeah, it's a weird moment, like in this one, TR.
Yeah, they got some weird kerning too.
Yeah.
Whereas yours, you know, this is like, you know, those moments where it is kind of narrow compared to your large rounds. I mean, that feels pretty good to me and stuff. You know, a few little spacing things. There might be some of these letters like the B, I think the B and the P, there might have been an R or something, might be a little too much contrast, I think. Yeah. Totally agree.
Like at least, I mean, that's why I was curious what you would pair it against. Because looking at these two blogs, what I really like about it is that the predominance of round shapes, really. And again, that might skew the eventual direction of text versus display. But it's something that I like in a way. And I think like we mentioned before, the diagonal characters, they are the ones that stick out because they are so fundamentally different from the round theme that's going on. So I think they make it and break it in a way of appearance and how well the overall sort of round mood gets carried all the way.
Obviously, you know what? The thing for me, I think overall your project is it's most successful when it's subtle, right? So this kind of leads again to the original question of, do you want this to be display or text? For example, the R's, you know, it's a really nice move. I could feel it slightly, the contrast, but it's very subtle and it's not very abrupt in its move about it. And I feel like it has a good proportion to it, and I think it actually could work really well in text with the right kind of some spacing, color decisions to respond to that condition. So, but that's the thing. It depends if you want to go in that direction versus a more explicit display system. And that way your diagonals are really a question of, can they blend well with these other more subtle weight changing decisions? For example, if you go in the text route.
Right now I'm looking at the M. The M seems kind of squashed and like smaller on the right side than the left side. I think that needs more width, but I'm also looking at that compared to what you chose for the W construction. Did you try this construction for the lowercase at all? You know, something a little, you know, less pointy geometric, but having some overlappy sort of strokes or something, or I don't know if there's
Oh,
something else you could try. Yeah.
I feel like if you look at the gray value of this is like, I liked it more that it's spread out, and for the uppercase it was just too wide. And I feel that already with the M, I tried versions where they were really wide also, but that looked grotesque in a way. So for the lowercase W, I kind of like this very geometric feel, and I feel it's probably also in the capitals like A and V and W that the point of the apex and vertex, they are really sort of sitting a lot alone up here with too much space around them, not knowing what to do. So that's why I feel they look uneasy, like this one here too. Like they have so much white space down here. So I kind of liked on the W that was a bit more condensed looking for the cap, but for the lowercase, then this design seemed more to do the trick.
Sure. Yeah, I can see how those would get so wide. Yeah, I don't know. I still wish that the M, it still looks a little compressed to me or something. But yeah, in this context, like you said, I mean, I do think these look appropriate, if not just like a little too dark. If you could, I don't know, there's some way to get a little
somehow, yeah.
But and I really do like the U, so I'm taking back any previous criticism. Like there's something, and maybe even just something about seeing it with the
with the crazy
accent we were questionable about. It's actually kind of cute. So okay, maybe I'm warming to it. So.
I'm not warmed up to it yet. No, I think a little tighter, please. But yeah, so I think overall, I'm very happy with the approach. I think you're doing a good job overall. Once you resolve these ambiguities in your decision.
Cool. So are we scooting over? Yeah, we're at the larger
setting.
Larger setting. So that's cool. Good stuff. So yeah, I wanted to include this to just really like, it's so interesting to see the width differences between the caps. It's quite like really surprising, I think. And I don't know whether that's good or bad surprising, but it's there. Maybe I wonder if the caps are just a little too tightly spaced compared to this spacing of the lowercase or something. Or,
yeah, something like that. Sure. Definitely. Also the space. Also just the spacing. Like the S needs to be, something's up with the S. Like next to ASE it feels way too tight on the right side.
I don't not agree.
Fair enough. Or you know what? Maybe Thomas, you're thinking maybe it's that this top maybe feels like it's leaning forward ever so slightly or something. Or I don't know.
It could be. Yeah, whatever. All I'm saying is in the setting of a word, it just feels like it's leaning forward next to the E, close to the E.
Something I'm noticing. Just wanted to point out that there's like a strange weight difference between the capital I and the lowercase l. Also, I think there needs to be more space in between these two, but it feels a little bit thicker and like, I don't think in a good way. So maybe if there's a way that can be more similar, that would help. And again, like this is another one of those examples. A couple of those letters R, P, I think they had a little more contrast than we saw elsewhere. So I think that's something to keep in mind and might need some adjustment. What else can we say?
Right.
This is looking really good. I like.
Yeah, good strategy.
Yeah, those look quite good together. What else? Is there anything else?
I think with the capitals also, I mean, like you picked a good word in the sense that it doesn't have any of the round characters. Then when again here you bring on one of the round characters, it right away like bloats up the width. So I think it's if you look at the E, for instance, it's something like I deliberately kept quite condensed, or like at least not go for this matching the width of these kind of characters. So I do agree that probably you have combinations that look like they change the appearance of the typeface, which is then again not a good thing. So in that sense, you're right about the width difference between the capitals and the lowercase. And then again, of course, in the lowercase, you have so many of these strictly round characters that right away that also pushes. So I think it's probably a good idea to, like you suggest, have these at least give them more space. And I think with the S, I was just like following along when Thomas talked about this being so tight here. And it's again like the huge gap of the A. Like if I look at this S, it almost looks to me like it's back leaning, whereas this S looks almost like it's forward leaning because of the space that it has around. So I almost think that this S looks more uneasy with the E because of the A before it, which is, of course, a good problem to have, to think about, like how they interact with different shapes.
Yeah,
excellent.
Yeah, and I do like that you did embrace that, the width differences and stuff, because if I'm comparing your typeface with Tenor Sans, like that, these, I mean, yes, these are desperate words and stuff, but I really think yours look very elegant, and I could see myself using these as a title much sooner than I would. There's something strange about how some of these connect together or don't connect together. Yeah, right. And again,
whoa.
What
Yeah,
happened?
I don't know what just happened. That was weird. Anyways, okay.
Anyway,
so let's conclude, guys. What's the conclusion? Is this body text or is this display? What's everyone's thoughts on that?
Ooh, well, you know my thoughts. My thoughts are, I think for display, I would love to see this. We didn't get a chance to look at the other weights that you've developed, but I think if you really emphasize that contrast, like even a tiny bit further, I think it would make an even stronger display. But for right now, body text, like it seems more like that, but it would need more space. I think it's too tightly spaced, in my opinion. But for that context, what are other folks' thoughts?
Well, it should be the author's decision in the end. I've already said in my case to go the other way.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, how would I say, it's more a decision of how much contrast I want to introduce. And I think what strikes me funny of this session talking with you guys is that I had this almost this parallel in mind that, okay, adding more contrast will shift it more towards display use, but it needn't necessarily be so. So it could even be geared more towards display and not have a lot of more contrast than it has right now. So I'm still on the fence in a way, but I do think the word settings we just looked at, they look more elegant, and I'm not sure is it a good aim of a typeface to just look elegant, but if that is the merit, then it's more leaning towards display.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. This has been a great exploration, and thank you for showing this work again. I think it's been really fun. Actually, I think it's really great to see these kind of in development typefaces that you're still working out the process. I think it's a lot of educational value for that. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah,
I'm glad that you brought it in where at the point in time that you did, where it's still kind of filled with questions. That was really helpful. So thanks, Johannes. That was great to take a look. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your comments.
Awesome. All right, that concludes this week's episode. Don't forget, if you want to share your work at TypeThursday at Fontribute, email us and we'll get you signed in a couple of weeks. All right, take care, everyone. Have a great week.